Today's video is sponsored by Blinkist. This is incredibly juicy and succulent. This is probably the best seitan steak that I've made, and that's all made from washing a ball of flour. This started out just as a regular dough ball, and it's unbelievable. This is gonna be like your more fatty, more really like, imagine if you can marinate a steak all day long and make it just super tender. That's what this is. Now, you've already seen loads of people making chicken out of washed flour. I've made it dozens of times, and it's what's really currently trending right now because of TikTok. But what TikTok doesn't say is the fact that you can really make any meat using seitan. It's very, very versatile, and it comes out very meaty. Today, we're gonna be making a steak, but you can use a lot of these same techniques to make like a pork. You can make a pork chop if you wanted. It is wild what you could do with seitan, and I hope you experiment, but let's get moving. This one's gonna be easy. Okay, so just like anytime we're gonna be making a washed flour seitan, we're gonna start with making a ball of dough. Now, when you're looking for flour, you're gonna wanna look for flour that has high protein content. Today, we're gonna be using a bread flour, but just like in the past where I've used like an all-purpose flour, that will work fine. A bread flour is gonna get you a higher yield of gluten with less starch, so that's pretty good in the scenario when you wanna wash out as much starch as possible to get all of the gluten. So let's start by making our dough ball with our bread flour. I'm gonna be using 5 cups of flour to 2 cups of slightly cold water. I'm just gonna knead that and stretch that into a nice elastic dough ball. I'm gonna knead this for about 10 to 15 minutes by hand, pretty vigorously. I want a very solid dough ball. We're making a steak here. I will say, whatever day you decide to do this, just go ahead and skip the gym. You're not gonna need it. Whew, it's a workout, but as far as getting the best plant-based meat you've ever had, this is the way to go. There's a reason why everybody's making it right now. That being said, there's a lot of content creators making washed flour seitan. It is a kind of a tricky process that I haven't mastered yet. I play around with it. But I will say, if you want information from people that know what they're talking about, people that have been making this stuff for years, check out the Seitan Appreciation Society. There is a ton of seitan recipe creators in that group. You can search for washed flour seitan and find all of the information you need. If you're really interested in this, that group of people is probably some of the best, smartest group of people that I know. Hey gang, let's pause here real quick for today's sponsor, Blinkist. Now, I don't know about you, but I am pretty much constantly busy with this work, and I don't really get that much time to sit down and enjoy reading anymore. Now, I personally enjoy reading a lot of entrepreneurial books, and I just really haven't had a chance to do that lately until I installed Blinkist. With Blinkist, you don't have to dedicate all your time to reading or listening to a whole book. You get just the highlights in around 15 minutes that you could read or listen to podcast style. It is awesome. I finally got to catch up on one of my favorites, Gary Vaynerchuk, Crushing It. I never got to read that book. And now I'm checking out Claudia Hammond's Mind Over Money, The Psychology of Money and How to Use It Better. That's something I'm pretty excited about, and I'm gonna check it out in the next 15 minutes when I'm done filming this video. You've never been able to get through so many different concepts of books in so short of time. So the first 1,000 people to go to Blinkist.com/SauceStache will get unlimited access for 1 week to try it out. And you'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership, which I know you will. It's awesome. Thanks Blinkist for sponsoring today's video. Once we get that dough ball formed, it's nice, smooth, and elastic. Let's throw that into a bowl of cold water, cover it up, and let it rest for about an hour. Okay, so this has been resting for about an hour. We're gonna start our washing process. Essentially, all we're gonna be doing, we have our dough ball here, which is now nice and soft. A lot of the starches and everything are nice and loose now. We're just gonna be kneading this under the water. Just give it a good solid knead. And while you're kneading, those starches will all start to remove themselves. Your water will get incredibly milky. Now you could do this in the sink and just let that water just run down. I like to save my starch water because then you end up with a ton of wheat starch, which can be very useful. I have a ton of videos on that. I'll leave those linked up in the cards here, wherever they're at. But once your water becomes very milky, you can pour that into a container or another bowl. Start with fresh, clean water again. You'll probably have to go through 2 or 3 washes. For this method, because we're gonna be making more like a beef, I'm not gonna be washing this fully. Sometimes for chicken, you wanna wash all of the starch out, or as much as possible. In this scenario, we're gonna be doing an almost washed. And you can see this starts to get kind of crazy looking. This is your gluten strands. Now this is the second wash, which is pretty much, in this scenario, might do it. We're gonna go just a little bit farther, but I'm gonna get creative with this steak, and we're gonna remove probably 25%, just a small portion of this here. It's still fairly starchy, but it's nice and washed. We're gonna kind of save this and just set this to the side. This is gonna be part of like your marbling for this steak. Okay, after our third wash, this is what we are ending up with. This is still kind of starchy, but I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. Okay, so we have our washed gluten. So now we're gonna flavor them and add some fat. This portion here is gonna be your fat, the marbling side, of course. This side is our meaty side. This is gonna be what's gonna make up our steak. And it's gonna be really good, really, really good. It has like this weird skin kind of feeling to it. Like, if nobody, after this big gluten trend happens this year, if nobody makes some like cool Halloween costumes out of this, I'll be really disappointed. Now, this should make a few steak medallions, but we're not gonna be using much fat. I don't wanna get this too oily. So I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of coconut oil. I particularly have my coconut oil solidified, pretty solid right now. Shouldn't make a huge difference. Might be a little bit easier to incorporate, not really sure. Then I'm just gonna do about a pinch of the mushroom extract. Then all we're gonna do is just give this a blend to incorporate. It's gonna pulverize this pretty quick. Now I mixed the fat in first because there's gonna be a lot of color in this one, and I don't want that color to get mixed in because, like I said, this is what's gonna give us our meaty look, the color. So I'm gonna start with about a teaspoon of the Better Than Bouillon, about 2 teaspoons of the cocoa powder, about a tablespoon of whole beet, so just 1 cube, 2 tablespoons of the beetroot juice. Then I'm gonna add about a teaspoon of blackstrap molasses. That is going to give us a really nice irony taste, which is really a defining flavor of meat, of beef. All we're gonna do is throw our washed flour gluten into the blender with all of those flavors and spices. And then let's pulse this together. And at this point, as long as your blender's not burnt out, you now have like a hot liquid gluten. Stuff is sticky, and this will be your steak. I promise you. I know it looks weird, but it will be. Now at this point, all of those individual gluten strands are still there, but they just got so tore up and shredded that this just feels like this soft, sticky kind of mess. What we need to do is now work these gluten strands back together and get them all lined up. The way to do that is we're just going to stretch in one direction and then fold together. And we're gonna keep doing that for just a minute until you feel this gluten tightening up. And then once we feel comfortable that we have a nice solid steak, I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of tear this up a bit, stretch it out. And so all I'm gonna do is just kind of work this sticky mess into the steak in different scenarios, kind of stretching it thin. It's gonna be thicker and thinner depending on where you're at. And all I'm gonna do, once I got all of that incorporated, is just roll it into about a burrito-sized log. Now, just to keep this steak its proper shape, I'm gonna throw it on a piece of parchment paper. And once we get our little burrito, we're just gonna make sure that it stays this side by wrapping it tightly lengthways into some foil. Now at this point, I'm just gonna throw this little package into a steamer for about 45 minutes. That's gonna be its initial cook. This is where we have our steak. Now, it's best to let this rest. The longer it rests, the more it's gonna compact into itself, the denser it's gonna get, the more meat-like it'll be. Now at this point, we're gonna simmer this. We're gonna kind of do it almost like a braising. I'm gonna throw this into a large saute pan and we're gonna make a really simple broth. It's gonna be 1 teaspoon of your bouillon, 1 cup of your beet juice liquid, and about a tablespoon of olive oil. Now, if you need to add extra liquid just to kind of get about half of your steak in the simmering broth, add about another cup of water to that. Let's go ahead and simmer that covered on a very low simmer for about an hour. Okay, so once it's done simmering in the broth, we're gonna let it rest for just a moment, and then we're gonna cut it into our steaks. I'm gonna cut these about 1 inch thick, so they're gonna be about 1 inch thick strips. They're not gonna be like your normal like steak, but that's okay. That's just the way seitan goes. We're just working with what we got. After they're cut, I'm just gonna set them on their side, let them rest for about an hour. I know this is taking a ton of time, but it's gonna be worth it, because then all we're gonna do is just season these with some salt and pepper, throw a little bit of oil in a skillet, heat these on high, sear both sides, and then you have yourselves a legitimate steak. Look at this. This is a cut off of the steaks that we just made. You can see the texture through here and how incredible steaky and meaty these things are. This is unbelievable.